Okay, perhaps we wait another minute to see whether everybody is. Yes, everybody is back. Okay, I think then we can start now. Raphael, there's some switching going on. So yes, that's the screen we should see.
Okay.
And then, now I guess the microfoundational essentialist social ontology will somehow contrast to the structural realism advocated by Don and in a certain sense by myself and Guillaume later today as well, which is a good, a good contrast, and we are excited to see how this turns out, Raphael. So,
thank you, Michael. So yeah, I feel very nervous to talk after Don. So for me, it's a little bit like trying to play piano after Horowitz or Rubinstein. So I really try to make up some excuses to avoid being in this situation, but for some reasons, the organizer wouldn't buy any of my lies. So I don't want to thank the organizer for putting me in this situation, and I will just start my talk. So the talk is divided in 4 or 5 parts. So it's 4 claims I want to make. So first, microfoundational essentialist social ontology, which I will call MESO, is very desirable and seems feasible. Second, it is consensually accepted among philosophers that the belief in the feasibility of the program has been proven wrong. Third, the conclusion that MESO is not feasible is premature. The crucial question is how can MESO meet the Kincaid-Zal challenge, the KZ challenge. Fourth, with the general ontology of dispositions and mechanisms, MESO meets the KZ challenge, and then objections, but actually it will be more your work, and I fear you will do it well. So first proposition, microfoundational essentialist social ontology, MESO, is very desirable and seems feasible. So what is the goal of social ontology? Is the study of nature and property of the social world. It's concerned with analyzing the various entities in the world that arise from social interaction. So what is an essentialist comprehension of social ontology? First, we should distinguish 2 concepts: normal definitions, which describe the way something appears, so it gives necessary and sufficient conditions of the way something appears, or some kind appears, and the real definition describes its essence. A real definition should explain the nominal definition. So an essentialist social ontology see the social ontologist's work as trying to formulate real definitions of social entities, processes, structures, properties. So let's just give an example of a nominal definition of a kind of agency that I invented, the speeding ticket agency. So from a phenomenal point of view, the speeding ticket agency is defined as the agency that links Guala and Hendrix traffic lights with the fact that I receive a parking ticket a few months later. So there is something in between that's happening, and it seems that it involves a social entity, since no human could observe everything that is going on in a whole country and send letters to everyone. And the link between the two must necessarily involve supernatural powers or super individual powers that no individual has. And so we have to, it seems to be a good definition of, nominal definition of a social entity. So now let's turn to essences. So how could we understand essences? So obviously it's a very spooky object, but I try to break it down into conditions. So first conditions to give the essence of something is that the essence is non-triviality. So the essence and the appearance of an entity must be different. Second, there is a condition of unicity. So the essence of an entity must be numerically the same in different circumstances, in spite of different appearances. There is a condition of identity. So two token different entities can have the same essence. So they can be type identical. A counterfactual dependence condition. So if the essence of an entity was different, its appearances would be different. And the fifth condition, fundamentality, the essential properties of an entity cannot be the appearances of another essence. So what are the motivations for the essentialist social ontology? I want to give a motivation because I know that it will, you won't like the idea of an essentialist social ontology. So I try to motivate the idea. So the first motivation is that it gives a reason for philosophers to exist. So it's already a good motivation for us to defend. It's a traditional conception of the function of philosophers. The second motivation is that it justifies the claim that ontology matters. So I won't get into the details, but so it shows that philosophers can help social scientists to have an agreement and to try to show that behind the differences between them, they're actually talking about the same thing. The identity of the essences of two cases would justify the extrapolation of the conclusion from one case study to another. So this is also very desirable. And there is also, for me, a political reason. So it helps to fight against political bullshit about social essences. So in France right now, we have Eric Zemmour, who claims that France and Muslims are not compatible. And I think to have philosophers who are involved to try to define essences, it helps to fight against this kind of assertion where when a politician just says bullshit about what the essences of things are. So, but there is a metametaphysical problem of social methodology, because I guess that many of you are just taken aback by this program. And the problem is the following, that we have all together, that when we have a methodological prescription, we, as philosophers, we try to find an ontology to justify this methodological prescription. But the problem that now we need a methodology for social natural ontology and for essentialist ontology. So we need an ontology that precedes ontology. So I guess we have all this problem, and the usual way is just to be a subjectivist, to say, okay, I don't like a speculative metaphysics, or I like a naturalist metaphysics. And so the way to deal with it is to present ontological methodology or metaphysical ontology as a stance, following Van Frassen and also Ross and Lediman. So I would like to advocate an objectivist research program in ontological methodology, and I think it should meet three conditions. So first, a distinction condition, which would distinguish between a general ontology and a spatial ontology in the same way as traditional metaphysics distinguish between metaphysica generalis and metaphysica specialist. The second condition is a consensus condition. General ontology claims should be self-evident or at least consensual among philosophers. Third condition is a justification condition. The general ontology should justify the methodology of spatial ontologies. So this is where microfoundational social ontology enters. I think that it could satisfy these three conditions. So I follow here Daniel's little lead when he claims that microfoundation could be a social ontology, or a social ontological claim. So the microfoundationalism can be understood with three claims. So first, ontological individualism. So everyone agrees that social entities are composed of individuals, but the question is then whether they're reduced to individuals, and then you have lots of disagreement, but everyone seems to agree that social entities are composed of individuals. So the second claim is microfoundationalism. So the concept of microfoundations, according to Little, relates to a specific understanding of social ontology. Social entities are understood to be compositional. They are assemblages constituted and maintained by the mentality and actions of individuals. And third, there is a supervenience, what could be called a supervenience claim. So there are no differences between social entities without differences between the sets of individuals that compose each of them. So we could represent it like this. So first, you have the idea that the essence of the social entity, which is the higher object, is the same as its composition. So the individuals that compose him. So if two sets of individuals are identical, then the conclusion is that the two social entities should be also identical. So here on this drawing, there is an important point that's to be noticed, that the two lower drawings, so they are token identical but not type identical. So they do not occupy the same place on the screen. And so there are two different sets of things from the token point of view, but not from the type point of view. So this is the idea that if we identify correctly the types of the individuals composing the social entity, then we will have its essence. The problem is that it's consensually accepted also among philosophers that the belief in the feasibility of this program has been proven wrong. So what are the objections against MESO? So first, it doesn't. Some philosophers can say that it doesn't justify, that it doesn't meet the non-triviality condition of essences. So, for instance, Jonathan Little said that there are no essences of Gewürztraminer wine because it's always, there is nothing above the level of the practices and the individual practices that compose it. Second objection is that MESO doesn't meet the unicity requirements. So this could be, this is the multifunctionality argument that says that if you have two sets of identical individuals, type identical individuals, they could have make up different social entities. There is you could also argue that the MESO doesn't meet. Sorry, I need to drink. So the MESO doesn't meet the identity condition. So this is the famous multi-realizability argument that if you have two social entities that are identical, that's type identical, they don't have the same kind of set of individuals that compose it. There is also an argument that said that the counterfactual dependence condition is not met. This is what Hodgson in his 2007 paper calls the folk impossibility theorem. That's the idea that it's impossible to derive from individuals an individualistic representation of reality the property of social entities or social entities. And there is also an argument that says that the fundamentality condition is not met. So this is the famous regress objection that is very, very old in philosophy. So you can find it in the discussion that Rousseau makes of Hobbes. So in contemporary literature also, there are many instances of this objection. Is the idea that every time we try to define an individual, or every time we try to define the relation between individuals, we need to have a social entity. And therefore, it's not possible to define social entities in terms of individuals, because every time we would try to do that, we would have to add a new social entity to do this. So these are the objections, and I would claim that the conclusion that MESO is not feasible is premature, and that the real question is that can MESO meet the KZ challenge? So in order to make this argument, I would say that these objections that I have quoted are made in an old theoretical context, and that there is a new context for MESO now. So I would just try to give this background picture and then to show what are its consequences for the arguments that I have quoted. So yeah, these are the different aspects that I want to examine. So if we look at social phenomena, so the first and old research program is theoretical reduction. And when we look at this program, so the explanations were conceived as reductive explanations that associate nomological statements with bridge principles, and you should manage to deduce from these two things the laws of the theory that you want to reduce. So this is a philosophical methodology. What the relator are propositions. The function is to justify ontological commitments, to say that the higher level entity don't exist, but only more precisely the reference of the higher level theory do not really exist, but it's only the lower level entity that really exists. It's linked with physicalism. The methodological ordering is that definitions are before explanations, because bridge principles can be either interpreted as nomological biconditionals or as they are definitions. So here, if I take them as definitions, your definitions are prior to explanations, and the leading metaphor is levels. In the second research program, which is Microfoundational. So it was developed since the last 20 years mainly, and so according to this program, the mechanistic explanation of the explanation of social phenomena are mechanistic. So to explain a social phenomena is to provide a mechanism. It was done by scientists. Philosophers have taken up on this practice, but it's a scientific practice. So the relator are not theories; they are entities. So the goal is to try to relate things that are in the world and to understand how they interact to produce, to generate macro effects. The goal, the function of the definition is to classify the phenomena. So, for instance, if you take the segregation model of Schiller, so it classifies a whole set of phenomena. So you could say about a phenomenon, okay, this is an instance of Schiller's mechanism, and so it helps us to mechanism when you have when we define and use when we distinguish between kinds of mechanisms, it helps us to classify phenomena and to distinguish different kinds of phenomena. In this case, explanations are prior to definitions. So first you have the model, the Schiller model, and then we can say, okay, everything that has the same structure will be a Schiller model. And the leading metaphor is not levels, it's scales. And it's important because levels is an ontological relation, scale is a representational relation. So scale relates two ways of looking at the same thing, but it relates to representation, and it doesn't say anything about reality. Oh yeah, these are the references, sorry. But there is also a distinction between two kinds of microfoundationalist programs. So actually we need to distinguish between three programs. So there is the first program, which could be associated with analytical sociology, is the idea that the microfoundation should be individual properties. So it's methodological individualism. So the content of the experiments should refer only to the individuals in a definition. The conception of individuals is very abstract. It uses RCT, and individuals are homogeneous. I knew that I was taking a risk by writing this word. So the last aspect is that the identification of the right explanatory scale is defined a priori. A priori, people say, okay, it should be individuals, and we know that already, so we expect any mechanical explanation to talk about individuals. But there is also another view. I will give the references. I think it's important. So there is also another view of this program, which doesn't exclude methodological holism. So methodological holism is usually now regarded as a non-controversial claim that a methodological explanation referring to social global social entities are epistemically legitimate in their own rights. So the content of the explainants is not necessarily individuals. It can be interactions between individuals, but it can also be meso entities. For instance, it's very difficult to give a mechanism explaining how the First World War appeared. If you just have individuals, you need to have states. So without states, you cannot explain how the fact that one person shot another person or just moved his finger to shot another person brought about the deaths of millions of people. So the conception of individuals is not the same. So it's in this way of looking at things, individuals are concrete. So they are maybe not individual, they could be said persons or actors. So according to Litter's expression, they are socially situated and socially constituted actors, and they are heterogeneous. And the status of the identification of the right explanatory scale is a posteriori. Ilikowski had shown that very well, so that you start with the explainants and you will not say, okay, I must find with the explanandum, sorry, and you don't say, okay, I have to find individuals to give an account of these explanandum. I can use, I have to find out what is the right level of entities that I need as explanants to bring about the explanandum. So now let's get back to the different arguments that we have seen. So I assume here that the good, I claim that that if we use the second version of microfoundationalism, so we could say a holist microfoundationalism, we can answer these problems, or and actually takes into account, because these are these objections that made the microfoundationalist position move. So from the individualist version to the holist version. So I will just get rid of the first objection, because it's a discussion within microfoundationalism and I don't have the time to really go into it. So then if we take the holist microfoundational conception, we don't have the Folk impossibility theorem anymore, because we have the right to postulate individuals with or persons with social properties in social interaction. We have the right to postulate meso entities, and if there is a regress, it's a regress that is general in any attempt of definition. When you try to define something, you need other words, and you need other words, and you need other words. But here, why is it not a vicious regress? Because we don't. This approach doesn't aim at eliminating the social aspect of social entities. So it's not as the definition doesn't aim at eliminating the social aspect of social entities, then it's not a problem if there are still social entities in the definitions. So this is not, I think, an objection that holds. Actually, I was talking about the regress objection. So the Folk impossibility theorem, why doesn't it hold? Because we have a richer vocabulary to deduce or to define the social entities. The multifunctionality argument. So I didn't quote the paper, but Julie Zahl has shown, I think it's a very fair point, that if we allow if we don't necessarily think that we need to define a social entity by its composing individuals, but also by its surrounding individuals, then it's possible to answer the multifunctionality argument. But the real argument that interests me here is the multi-realizability argument. I would say just multi-argument because I don't manage to say the word very well. So this is I think, the difficult argument. So I just rehearse the argument again. So this could be understood as regressio reductio ad absurdum arguments. So if you have the same entity, that social entity that is identical with different sets of individuals, which are, so then you have by transitivity contradiction. So we need to distinguish two aspects in this argument. So the first aspect of the multi-realizability objection is the etc. part. And this is the etc. problem, the idea that we can have indefinite number of realization of the same social entity. The second aspect of the multi-realizability is the type difference problem. So this is the idea that the two social sets that we see there don't belong to the same kind. So this is what creates the contradiction. So let's first take care of the etc. problem. So I would here distinguish two formulations of the objection. So first, we could talk about a multi-realizability argument, and second, we could talk a multi-realization argument. So multi-realizability is just speculative. So it just the etc. The philosopher, they say etc. because they have found two instantiations, but actually they don't provide the models. So I don't take this etc. very seriously. I think that if we are naturalists, so and if we find several models of the same social entity, what we should do is to say that actually we found different species of the same thing. So we could solve the multi-realizability problem in this way, to say that actually the things that we were talking about at the beginning are not the same thing. So this gives this situation. So let's not take a look at the different type problem. So this is what I call the KZ challenge, Kincaid-Tzal challenge. So I won't read the text. So maybe the general idea is the following: that if we can show that the types are actually identical for the right property from the right property, or let me say it differently. So if we can find the properties that make these wholes identical, then there is no reasons, there is no contradiction anymore. But the problem is that Tzal has very well articulated in her book with Finn Collins, is that the problem is how to do that without arbitrariness, how to avoid that it doesn't become just verbal questions. So what I claim is that the general ontology of dispositions and mechanisms can make MESO meet the KZ challenge, which is just the remaining challenge that we have to have a MESO standing on its own. So just very quick definition of what I call dispositional mechanism. So it's a general ontology, so it fits with natural science and with, I think, social science. So the first idea is dispositionalism, that concrete particulars, that's sets of individuals or sets of things, have a dispositional properties. So the second aspect of this definition is what we could call virtuality. So a dispositional property, it's just a definition. A dispositional property is a property which is manifested only when definite conditions occur. And the third property, which is very important to define a mechanism, is that the condition for the manifestation of a dispositional property of a concrete particular X is often, if not always, the instantiation of a relation with another particular R and the manifestation of a disposition of a dispositional property of Y. So for instance, if you want to boil water, so first you need to have something that has the dispositional property to produce, I would say warmth. So let's say gas or fire, and you have water, so they must have these dispositional properties, but they also need to be in a certain relation. So if you put them very far away from one another, nothing will happen. and the manifestation of the fire, or I would say the heating device that's produce the fire. So the manifestation of your gas machine, which is manifested by the occurrence of gas, is the condition for the manifestation of the dispositional property of water to get warm when in this condition. So then we have, if we have these three conditions, we have for free a mechanism. So a mechanism is a set of concrete particulars structured in such a way that the manifestation of each particular's disposition triggers another particular's disposition. So this is the first idea that I need to try to solve Kinsey challenge. So I will just skip that. It's the idea of emergence. I will just show it with drawings. So if you have, let's say, a particular with a property defined by the fact that the stimulus condition S produces the manifestation condition X, you have another entity with another, or you have, so this is the same entity, but I just defined properties. So you have property D2, D1, I made a mistake on the D1, you have the property D2, and they are different because the stimulus condition and the manifestation are different. So the disposition is identified by its stimulus and its manifestation. And you have a third dispositional property, which is defined as the fact that S produces M prime. So if you put the first two dispositions together, so the stimulus of D1 produces the manifestation MX, which is also by recursivity the condition of D2. So then you have this association, this mechanism. But if you look at the not at these two things as two different things, but as one thing, then you have the disposition D3. So you have a new disposition, and if an entity is defined by its disposition, then you have also a new entity. So this is the second idea. The third idea that I need is a distinction between mereological, causal, and constitutive relations. So I don't mean constitutive in the same meaning as Don just alluded to. So it's not a grounding relation, it's something else. So if you take this picture from Woodward's book, so we can distinguish this. You have a whole made of these objects, which is a very simple mechanism where the disposition of each object brings about the manifestation of the disposition of the other object. So first, you can analyze it mereologically. So you just enumerate the individuals and you describe them individually. You have also a causal analysis of this set. So it's just a series of events. One change brings about another change and brings about another change. But there is also what Ilikowski calls the constitutive relation. So the constitutive relation is just the relation between the disposition of this whole set of objects to change their aspect. So it's this is a disposition not of one individual, is the disposition of the whole set, that they don't have the same disposition at the end, or they don't have the same configuration at the end of the process. And so this global disposition is the result of each individual disposition. So constitutive relation is a counterfactual dependence on the whole, on the disposition of the whole, on the disposition of the parts. So if one of these objects didn't have the property to fall, the whole object wouldn't have the property to fall or to change. The third idea that I need is to make a distinction between two conceptions of the relation between a whole and its parts. So I need to distinguish between the representation of micro wholes and micro representation of a whole. So the idea that the identity between a disposition and its constitution is not an identity of the disposition with its parts. It's an identity between two wholes. So here there is no elimination of the reality of the whole. The whole on the right, it exists. So it's just the fact. So which should distinguish the fact that the same whole is seen as the same as is the same whole that is seen in two different ways. So, and the last idea that I need is the idea of, I won't go through all of this, it's just the idea of explanatory relevance. So it's a notion that is defined so an entity or property is explanatory relevant with regard to a macro property if and only if this property or entity were suppressed, the macro property would disappear. So what I claim is that this gives us a solution to a Kincaid-Sal challenge. So if you take the social entity above and the same social entity seen from another point of view, another perspective, another scale, or however you want to say it. So the problem is how to find out what are the relevant properties to give a definition of the social entity. So you have on the lower parts too many properties or too many entities. You have too many entities. These entities are the green arrows, and too many entities are the star and the triangle. So if you use the explanatory relevance criterion, which is possible in the context of mechanical explanation, then you can say that the things that were not necessary, or the things, these things shouldn't be mentioned in the definition, and then you have a solution to the problem. So the objections, I will just mention some of them. I thought a lot about lots of objections, and I'm sure you will have many also. So there is an objection that could be taken from Ilikowski, because Ilikowski claims that constitutive relations are not identity relations, and for my claim, I need to say that they are identity relations. So there is also this consequence that MESO essences are contextual essences. So does it make sense to have contextual essences? There is also an objection that is that I address to myself, is that the problem is whether we could also abstract the size of the social entities to say that two social entities are identical, whether should it count or not in the definition of a different social entity. So I think there is a very simple solution to this problem, is that when you look at what scientists do, they manage to say that there are two mechanisms that are identical, even though they do not have the same size. So, and also the last objection is my account provides only sufficient conditions for social essences, or sufficient and necessary conditions. So does it eliminate the speculative style definitions of social entities? So to wrap up, how should MESO be conceived in order to be feasible? So microfoundational real definitions of social entities should be seen as minimally metaphysical. I didn't define it because, yeah, it's just the idea that there is metaphysical work for philosophers to do, even when we don't talk about fundamental things. It should be mechanistic. It should be ontologically holist. The goal is not to eliminate global entities, and it should be contextual. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raphael. Perhaps you stop sharing your screen,
yes,
if you can,
yes,
so we can see each other in a much better way, and can go into the. Let you do this. Can you do this? I don't know whether I can do it.
I need to unshare.
I can try, yeah. Okay,
yeah,
I can do it. So I have real power, so I can change the screens of people. Okay, then Don, first question. So you have to...
Francesco's in front of me.
No, that was for your talk.
Oh, is it? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah. Great. Thanks, Raphael. That was really interesting, and you did a great job packing so much into a short talk. There's a real tour de force of slide organization there. So I think the elephant in the room, though, you won't be surprised to hear what I think it is, right? It's quantum physics. So let me frame the question by telling a little story. A couple of years ago, by basically accident, Carl Craver and I found ourselves running a workshop together in the Netherlands for a whole week. So we had all this forced time together between workshop sessions and talked a lot about mechanisms. And I said to Carl, do you want your whole mechanism story about science to be hostage to the way things come out in the philosophy of physics? That is, suppose we're right and there are no mechanisms in quantum theory. Do you want then everything that you advocate about the generality of mechanisms as a big story, the big story in philosophy of science to fall apart? And he said, no, of course. That is, he said, he should want the account to be compatible. He doesn't want to be committed to the claim that there must be mechanisms in quantum theory. So we sketched out a paper, which unfortunately we haven't had time to write, which would go like this. Suppose James and I are right about quantum theory, then tell our metaphysical story about how you can have a world of special science mechanisms, even in that world where there are no mechanisms in the universal physics. Now your metaphysics is done, right? You've done your metaphysics when you explain how a world of mechanisms could be. Then roll the mechanism story, right? Given how crucially, I mean, the mechanism story might look pretty plausible, but now notice you talked at the end about minimal metaphysics. If the idea that Carl and I have for this paper is right or bears fruit, then your story could in principle go through, but it wouldn't be metaphysics at all, right? Because the metaphysics would have been done already and created the enabling context for your story.
So if I don't do metaphysics, I'm very it's rather great news for me. So all I want to do is to provide a framework for giving these definitions. So as a microfoundational essential definition. So if it's not metaphysics, it's even better because it becomes scientific or common sense. I don't know. So and my second response would be that. I think that the minimalist way of doing metaphysics is it claims that we can start in the middle. So and I think it's legitimate. We know from science that there are mechanisms in society. So I'm not trying to give a general conception of mechanisms. I just start with the fact that there are social mechanisms, and social scientists they tell me that there are social mechanisms. They can recognize them. They help me to recognize them. So I think it's an objective feature of social reality that there are mechanisms. So I don't really need to go into quantum mechanics. And also, so more generally, I think that if you are non-reductive physicalist, you can start with individuals and thinking. So you don't need to have so yeah. I don't know if I really respond to your objection, but
I guess I'm suggesting that you take on a greater burden of argument if you want to claim that your mechanism story is a metaphysical story. And if you slough the metaphysics off to a prior operation, so to speak, if it's elsewhere, then you're just doing philosophy of science, right, with your mechanism story.
Yeah. So I think you spotted me right, because actually I'm not a speculative metaphysician at all. I'm a naturalist metaphysician, and I wanted to try to express to express speculative notions in terms of naturalist. To try to make sense in naturalist notion of a speculative notion. So in principle, it should be a reduction of speculative metaphysics to science, what I did. And then it's just the work of social scientists to tell us what are the real definitions of social entities. So this actually, I just see my work as just showing that social scientists, they have already the power to give us to describe the real essences of social entities.
Yeah, essences. I don't know. You need it. You see, I think if you slough off the metaphysics, you can also drop talk of essences. I don't know. Then I don't think you have any need for essences, and that's what I mean by reduce your burden of argument.
Yeah,
if you insist on talking about essences, then that's fighting words.
But yeah, that's true. But if you define, if you reduce, then it's okay. So, and I think I defined it. So, it's true that maybe it's not a good strategy. But I know I have to think about what you say. I need to, because it's a very big question.
Yes. Sorry to intervene, because I mean, this I would have the same worries. Now you could go on with dispositions, etc. And so, Raphael, you throw away all the metaphysical baggage, and then of course you can't be attacked anymore on the metaphysics. So they talk in these terms, but there's no metaphysical commitment. Okay, we should go on with Jonathan.
Okay, thanks, Raphael. That was super cool. And maybe this is going to be an instance of being attacked on the metaphysics now. I'm not sure. But I just wanted to kind of get a sense of what your notion of mechanism was doing for you. And maybe it came out a bit in your discussion with Dawn that you're not leaning very heavily on the definition, and you're sort of, there's more of a sense that like we kind of have an implicit understanding of when there are social mechanisms that we're allowed to appeal to. So the exact definition of mechanism maybe isn't so central to you. But I was worried, so the definition that you give, you say it's a mechanism as a set of concrete particulars structured in such a way that the manifestation of each particular's disposition triggers another particular's disposition. And I was just thinking, at least in, let's just take like a Newtonian world for sort of just maybe for simplicity, that any arbitrary collection, any arbitrary set of entities is going to count as a mechanism by this, because the manifestation of any one particular, say, having a given mass is going to trigger another particular disposition to accelerate. So pick take any set of entities, at least on the same time slice, and they'll have some causal connection. So it seems like, and maybe generalizing outside of Newtonian contexts, any set of entities that are causally connected is going to count as a mechanism, I'm thinking, on this account. But I guess I would have thought that a mechanism is something more than I mean, you can take like a hodgepodge of entities that happens to be accidentally causally connected. There's something to do with a more sort of reliable type level, ongoing opportunities for stable causal interactions, something like that.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. So you gave me a lot. So there is really a lot. So I think that I agree with you that in one way everything is a mechanism. So the only question is what kind of mechanism it is. So then you should the work would be to just try to distinguish this mechanism by the kind of relation they involve or the kind of disposition they involve. Also, I didn't go into it, but I tried to make a distinction between one-shot mechanisms that are just causal processes like a revolution, and mechanisms which are can be reiterated like a watch. So there are two different kinds of mechanisms. So I think it's there is lots of work for the mechanistic approach that I defend to distinguish the different kinds of mechanisms. But I would go, I mean, theoretically, it's possible that something would not be a mechanism. So it's what Don just said. But in general, I would sympathize with your view. But then I would just make a slight reserve that I don't know if in the social world, maybe you could imagine really people who are not interacting with one another. So I don't think that this is a realistic view, but you could see that as the results, even though, because you could say that I think that individualism, it's the result of a social process. So if you have people without mechanism, without interaction, leading them to act on one another. This is a social problem, and this is what Durkheim actually argued with the anomie of society. So this is the result of an evolution. But in this situation, maybe you could have situation where there is no more mechanism because each individual has not only one option, is to kill himself in the Durkheimian view. So you would have situations where you have just a set of individuals who don't interact, and yeah, this is just a possibility. But I don't know if I responded correctly to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Olivier.
Yes, thanks a lot, Raphaël. Sorry, it's not a question about your solution, but a question about the prior constraint you admit, namely ontological individualism and the view that essences are not apparent. So take an example such as a war between two nations. So there are two armies. I think it's a social phenomena, right? So the armies, according to your, and it fits with your ontological individualism, the armies are composed by individuals. I think it's not the case that the war is composed by individuals. Neither are the destruction caused by the war composed by individuals. So that makes at least two kinds of social phenomena which are not composed by individuals. So the first point I want to suggest is perhaps you can relax a bit on ontological individualism by saying perhaps individual actions or the results of individual actions to be a bit more accommodating. And likewise for the claim that essences cannot be apparent. I think, couldn't you live with the claim that social essences may not be apparent? Because just with that little example, it seems clear to me that the fact that there is, I may of course be wrong, but the fact that there is an essential difference between the war and the armies is a kind of essential claim that is readily apparent from the description of the fact. Of course, there may be other essential features of wars and of armies that we discovered afterwards, but I would be, yeah, you see the point. So could you also relax a bit the non-triviality constraint here to accommodate such counterexamples?
Yeah, thank you, Olivier. So actually, I agree with you. So I didn't really know how to phrase it correctly, this non-triviality constraint. So I think that the methodological ontological individualism, as I phrase it, is too restrictive, because you need also to take into account weapons, the earth, the environment. So it's true that I don't agree that with the way I phrase the thing. So I think that in the mechanisms, so you need to have these interactions, that atmosphere, and when we act with one another, we use tools and things. We wouldn't manage to have interactions if there was not this computer and the internet and all these non-human things. So I agree with you on this point, that it's not sufficient. It's too restrictive. And with the fact that I think you also spotted a second mistake, I guess, that I should not say that essences should not appear. So all I wanted to say is to have a kind to describe the process, the inquiry process. We start with nominal definitions in a way that we start with the descriptive ontology, and then we go to the foundational ontology. But it doesn't mean that the foundations are not observable. So, and I think they are observable from a certain point of view. And maybe scientists and statistics and things like this, they help us to see what is not necessarily directly perceivable, but it's still kind of perceivable because it's made of perceivable objects, observable objects. I don't know if I really answered to.
Just if I can briefly follow up on the second point. So my suggestion was that, so right now, non-triviality is the essence and the appearance of an entity must be different. I was suggesting you replace the must by a may, and leaving it open that some social essences, or at least part of the essences of some social entity, may be readily apparent. And my example was that there is an essential difference between the war and the participants in the war, and the soldiers, the armies. We are not learning much, but least we are learning a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with your point. Yeah, I think it's very useful. Many thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So if I get it right, there are no further questions right now. So we stop the session, have a lunch break. Sorry for phone, there's a phone ringing in my background. I don't know if it is. So yeah, see you again. Thank you again, Don and Raphael, and then we'll meet again at 2 o'clock.
See you later. See you
Okay, so I close the session, and then Raphael, you manage that we get back at 2 into the room. Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Have a good lunch break and see you.